Hey there. You're listening to True Story No Cap. Real stories, no exaggeration, no lies. Just the raw, unfiltered moments life throws our way. Relax, lean back, and let's get started. Eleanor held boundless love in her heart for only one person, her son, David. She saw him not just as a child, but as a precious gift from fate. Although she also had a daughter, Sarah, their relationship remained distant and cool. Sarah grew up self-sufficient and independent, and her mother, seeing no need for her constant care, wasn't worried about her future. But David? David also stood firmly on his own feet, achieving success, yet his mother's heart couldn't believe it. Eleanor was convinced that without her tireless control and help, her son simply wouldn't survive, like a tender sprout without moisture. This was a profound delusion, but no arguments could shake her certainty. No matter how much David tried to loosen the suffocating grip of his mother's care, it was all in vain. In the end, he gave up, learning to navigate under constant supervision and hyper-control. Sometimes, of course, this weighed on him, but David had learned an important lesson from early childhood. Arguing with mom was pointless. Real difficulties in his relationship with his mother arose when David decided to get married. His chosen one, Helen, was already the third contender for the role of wife who had passed his mother's casting. The two previous girls had been simply worn down by the caring mother. They couldn't stand the total control and preferred to break off the relationship just to gain freedom. Helen turned out to be a girl of amazing patience and understanding. David had warned her in advance about the peculiarities of his mother's care, honestly telling her that they would be living under the same roof. "Dave, I understand everything. You don't choose your parents," Helen replied calmly. "What can you do? I'll try to find common ground with your mother." She added with a warm smile, "After all, she gave life to the man I love, and for that alone, I'm ready to put up with her nagging." However, Helen couldn't yet fully imagine how sophisticated and exhausting Eleanor's nagging could be. She was about to face the true scale of maternal love and its destructive power. The future seemed hazy, but Helen was ready to fight for her happiness. The first meeting with the future mother-in-law was scheduled for the following Saturday. Eleanor was not supposed to know that David had already proposed and received a positive answer. Helen was very nervous before this meeting, realizing that their shared future was at stake. Having asked David in advance about his mother's tastes and dislikes, Helen tried to prepare herself mentally, although the anxiety was still acutely felt. Helen baked a honey cake, the potential mother-in-law's favorite, carefully chose her outfit and waited for David. He, having bought a bouquet of flowers on the way, picked her up and they headed to his home. Helen's heart was pounding, but she tried to maintain outward calm. Eleanor was also preparing to receive her future daughter-in-law, although in her heart she had already delivered her verdict. Without even seeing the girl, she was mentally set against her. Not for a second doubting that she wouldn't like Helen, Eleanor was unshakably convinced. No one ever could take care of her son better than his own mother. Eleanor met them in the hallway, dressed in a smart dress and light makeup, looking quite friendly. However, Helen physically felt the waves of negativity emanating from this woman. Perhaps for the first time in her life, she so clearly felt that she was unwelcome, but Helen was not used to backing down, and was ready to endure for the sake of the man she loved. During dinner, Eleanor asked standard questions about Helen's family, housing, education, and work. The girl answered calmly and confidently, for she had something to be proud of. She grew up in a well-off family with a good upbringing. Helen's father was a retired colonel, her mother a practicing surgeon. Helen herself graduated from medical school and now worked as a gastroenterologist in a prestigious private clinic. Helen's account made a strong impression on Eleanor. David's previous girlfriends had been much more modest. One worked as a nail technician, the other as a sales assistant in a boutique. Eleanor was impressed that Helen came from a respectable family with an excellent education, and she might have even praised her if the girl hadn't been vying for the role of her son's wife. Overall, the dinner passed without visible conflicts. David drove Helen home and returned, understanding that a serious conversation with his mother was unavoidable. His mother was waiting for him in the living room, and from her tense appearance it was clear that Helen had somehow displeased her after all. David mentally prepared to defend his fiancée. "Mom, well, is something wrong again? What didn't you like about Helen this time?" David decided to go on the offensive immediately. His mother pretended to be surprised by his question. "Why did you decide I didn't like her?" she asked, feigning bewilderment. Quite a nice girl, educated, cultured, pleasant to talk to, David began, anticipating what was coming. But, he added, knowing that this but was bound to follow. But there must be a but, right? His mother interrupted, confirming his guess. Yes, if it weren't for one but. I think she's boring, Eleanor said, uttering the most ridiculous possible complaint. David couldn't help but laugh. Mom, are you serious? Boring? How did you come to that conclusion? He asked, still smiling. I don't know. It just seemed that way to me, his mother replied, unable to find a better explanation. It was obvious that Eleanor simply couldn't find a more substantial reason to nitpick. She continued to insist, trying to sow doubt in her son. How will you live with her? Have you thought about that? She asked with feigned anxiety. I'll live excellently with her, Mommy, David replied confidently. Stop looking for a black cat in a dark room, especially if it's not there. Helen is a very good girl, calm, well-mannered, cultured, exactly the kind you dreamed of for me, Mom. He walked over to his mother, took her hands, and looked her in the eyes. Listen, I'm 32 years old. I want a family and children. How much longer should I keep choosing? Eleanor understood that her son was absolutely right and that it was high time for him to start his own family. However, she so didn't want to share him with anyone, and even the thought of future grandchildren didn't warm her lonely heart. Besides her son, she felt she needed no one else in this world. You're right, son. It's time for you to get married, she began her usual song. It's just that I still think you're a very little boy who needs his mother and her care more than anything in the world. But you've grown up, and perhaps your mother is no longer needed. Mommy, don't say silly things, David gently objected. I'll always need you and we'll live with you. I'm not going anywhere. We'll still talk, have dinner together, go shopping, go to the dacha. He continued, painting a picture of their future. It's just that there will be one more person living in our house, and over time, maybe more than one. It's much more fun that way, and you won't be alone when I'm away on business trips. David looked at his mother hopefully, and Eleanor couldn't bear his gaze. She had never been able to refuse her favorite, her main reward. Sighing, she uttered the words he had been waiting for. Okay, get married. I won't interfere. Mommy, I knew you were the wisest woman in the world, David exclaimed, hugging and kissing his mother. He was happy that he had managed to convince her, although he understood that this was just a temporary truce. But right now, that was the most important thing. 2 months later, Helen and David got married, and the girl moved into her husband's house. The first few weeks passed surprisingly smoothly, like a fairy tale. Helen couldn't even believe that everything could be so good. Eleanor was nothing but benevolent, chatted kindly with her daughter-in-law, and helped her in every way, creating the illusion of an ideal relationship. But then David left on a week-long business trip, and the mask fell off. It started with trifles, escalating into an endless stream of complaints. You're ironing David's shirts wrong. You didn't add enough salt to the soup. You added too much salt to the porridge. You put the cups in the wrong place. The climax was the exclamation, You cannot sit in this armchair. This is David's armchair. All members of our family know that. Complaints poured out like from a horn of plenty, and Helen couldn't understand how the same person could change so drastically literally overnight. She silently endured, re-ironed shirts, rearranged dishes, and corrected all her imaginary mistakes. The real nightmare erupted when Helen brought home a little kitten. David had told her that they had always had cats, and Helen naively believed that the appearance of a fluffy creature would soften the atmosphere. She had discussed it with her husband, and David had approved the idea, but Eleanor thought differently. Why did you bring this flea-ridden thing into the house? She exclaimed angrily. Do you know I can't stand cat hair? You're doing this to spite me. And that's when Helen couldn't take it anymore. The cup of her patience overflowed. Dear Eleanor, what are you trying to achieve? Helen asked calmly but very confidently. That David and I divorce? Well, that's not going to happen. We love each other. She continued, looking her mother-in-law directly in the eyes. I discussed getting the kitten with your son, and he assured me that you always had cats in the house and that you would surely like this idea. But it turns out that even this you are ready to deny just because I brought the kitten. Helen paused briefly and then uttered words that made her mother-in-law freeze. The only thing you will achieve with this attitude towards me is that we will move into a rented apartment and you will be left alone, Helen said firmly. Does that option suit you? I don't think so. So either we live together peacefully or we leave. she finished, looking at her mother-in-law not just as a daughter-in-law anymore, but as a woman defending her family. You can forget about us breaking up. I'm expecting a baby. Eleanor looked at her daughter-in-law with completely different eyes, as if seeing her for the first time. So you have character, girl? She thought with surprise. You want to fight with me? Well, well. But out loud she said completely different words in which there was a hint of concession. I don't want you to go live somewhere else. Maybe I really am being a little hard on you, but you have to understand me. I'm a mother. I want my son to be happy. And you think I came into his life to ruin it? Helen retorted, not backing down. Have I given you the slightest reason to think so badly of me? No. Eleanor turned, preparing to leave, but then turned back to her daughter-in-law. Okay, let's live in peace, she said, and her voice no longer had the former sharpness, especially since you shouldn't be getting upset. This conversation became a turning point. After this conversation, Eleanor truly changed her behavior. She stopped picking on Helen for any reason and none, trying to spend more time in her room and cross paths with her daughter-in-law less often. Helen noticed that the kitten, whom she had named Jasper, became a frequent guest in her mother-in-law's room, and she held him even more often than Helen herself did. Life under the same roof slowly began to improve, taking on calmer outlines. 2 years passed. Helen and David had a son, whom they named Edward after David's father. His father-in-law had been a police officer and died tragically in the line of duty. Eleanor always spoke of her husband with warmth and love, while David barely remembered his father. He was only 4 years old when the tragedy occurred. Little Eddie grew up, becoming the center of attention. His grandmother often played with her grandson, took him for walks while Helen did household chores. Eleanor's attitude towards her daughter-in-law, perhaps, hadn't completely changed. She still disliked her, but now she did so silently, without open nagging. David worked a lot, often going on business trips. Their family life flowed calmly and measuredly, but, as often happens, unforeseen circumstances burst into their quiet haven. David had to go away for a month to another country, and Helen really didn't want to let him go, but there was no choice. The trip was necessary for work. A couple of days after his departure, Helen noticed that Eleanor was behaving somewhat strangely. Silent, not playing with her grandson, looking depressed. Gathering her courage, Helen decided to talk to her mother-in-law. Eleanor, is something bothering you? Helen asked uncertainly. Maybe something hurts? Tell me, I'm a doctor, I can help. Her mother-in-law replied calmly, Nothing hurts. Everything is fine. But Helen didn't believe her and decided to observe her behavior more closely. The day after that conversation, Helen accidentally overheard Eleanor talking to someone on the phone asking for help. Helen didn't understand exactly what was being said, but she clearly heard the words, I need your support. Eleanor had many acquaintances, friends, relatives with whom she kept in touch, but she could only ask for help from the closest ones, and this made Helen worried. Helen called David, feeling growing anxiety. Dave, you need to talk to your mom urgently. Something's going on with her and she's not telling me anything. I heard her asking someone for help on the phone, but I didn't understand what kind. Helen added, You talked to her? Maybe it's something with her health? I can help. Okay, Helen, I'll definitely talk to her today, David replied, reassuring her. And in general, how are things with you? Helen sighed. Well, okay. It's just that your mom isn't herself. It's making me anxious. I understand. I'll call you tonight after I talk to her, David promised. In the evening, David called back, and his voice was worried. He reported that his mother's test results were bad. The doctor at the clinic said that urgent surgery was needed, but his mother was afraid to go through with it. Helen, try talking to her again, David asked. I asked Mom to at least show you the test results. She seemed to agree. But show her care and attention. You know how she is. For my sake, of course. Dave, I'm worried about her myself, Helen replied sincerely. I'll do everything I can. She resolutely headed to her mother-in-law's room, ready to put aside all past grievances. Eleanor, I understand that you don't like me and perhaps consider me a bad daughter-in-law, but please allow me to help you anyway, Helen said, approaching closer. And then something completely unexpected happened for Helen. Eleanor began to cry bitterly, covering her face with her hands. Helen was even frightened to see her tears. Eleanor, what's wrong? Helen asked cautiously. Is it that bad? Cancer? No, her mother-in-law replied through tears, shaking her head. It's just that I turned to my daughter, and she doesn't have time to go to hospitals with me. But that's understandable. I always only focused on David. She has reason to be offended by me. She continued, talking about her loneliness at this difficult moment. My sister is also caught up in her own affairs and problems. My close friend is at the dacha. They won't come to the city for my sake. They say, you have children. And it turns out that no one cares about me. And I'm scared, you understand? Very scared. Okay, let's calm down, Helen said softly, sitting down beside her. You'll tell me everything in detail. Eleanor showed her the test results, explaining that the doctor strongly recommended surgery, claiming that time had been lost and the outcome was unclear. Helen carefully examined the results and then looked at her mother-in-law with surprise. Which clinic were you at? Our District 1? Helen asked, already having a suspicion. I don't see anything terrible, let alone irreparable, in your test results. She continued confidently. I'll call my gynecologist right now, and we'll go for a consultation tomorrow. I'm sure this is some kind of mistake. Really? Her mother-in-law looked at Helen with timid hope, a ray of light gleaming in her eyes. Really, Helen confirmed, smiling. The next day, Helen and Eleanor went to the medical center where Helen worked, to her acquaintance, the doctor. The gynecologist carefully listened to all the complaints, examined the presented test results, and was extremely surprised by his colleague's decision from the district clinic about the need for urgent surgical intervention. Eleanor, I assure you, you have no indications for surgery, he said, reassuring the patient. I will prescribe you treatment, you'll go through it, and everything will be perfectly fine. Eleanor cried again, but this time it was tears of relief and gratitude. The gynecologist, Andrew, looked at Helen in surprise. Helen, can you go see this specialist yourself? He asked, indignant. Let her explain why she scared your mother-in-law. You can't scare people like that. Don't worry, Andrew, I'll sort it out, Helen replied. When they left the center, Eleanor stopped, took Helen's hand and looked her in the eyes. Helen, please forgive me, she began, and her voice held sincere remorse. I was very unhappy. I picked on you for any reason and none. I am guilty before you. She cried again, unable to control her emotions. And you? And you turned out to be the only person who came to my aid. Her voice trembled. After all, if I'd gone to the doctor with anyone else, I would have been sent for surgery. No one would have bothered to investigate. Thank you, my girl. Thank you so much. Eleanor looked at Helen with newfound warmth. I promise you, I will be the most loving mother-in-law in the world. Helen also couldn't hold back tears, completely unexpected such confessions and warm words from her mother-in-law. It's okay, Eleanor, she said, squeezing her mother-in-law's hand. We are one family, and we should help and support each other. Eleanor gave a bitter smile. More often in life, it's the opposite. Strangers support and help, while your own are too busy. Well, then we are the exception to the rule, Helen smiled, trying to lighten the mood. Let's go home. Eddie is waiting for us there with my mother. They took a few steps, but suddenly Eleanor stopped sharply and looked at her daughter-in-law again, as if making an important decision. Listen to me now. Just don't interrupt, she said with a new, determined intonation. I want to thank you so that you see not only in words, but also in deeds, that I have changed. She uttered words that took Helen's breath away. I will sign over my share of the apartment to you, so that you and David are always on equal footing. That will be fair. But, Helen tried to object, stunned by this turn of events. Stop arguing with me, her mother-in-law said playfully, sternly, interrupting her. On this matter, I will be categorical, strict, as befits a real mother-in-law. She smiled, and this smile was warm and sincere, and then hugged her daughter-in-law as if she were the dearest person in the world.